Hi, my name is Susan Young, and today we're exploring craving. And today we're using Judson Brewer's work at the Center for Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts as a foundation for our exploration, but we're also sharing our own experiences of craving. And even though Judson Brewer talks about the way that the brain gets addicted, that's kind of his specialty, how we focus on the brain. There's so many elements that you all brought forward. There's psychological, there's, the sense of belonging. There's how do we, when we crave, what is the root cause of the craving? And so we might sort of be talking about the cycle of desire. That's what we're talking about today, which is both in a way of using the addiction model, but also through a way that we condition the brain. So if we see an object of desire around us, TV, sugar, something with salt. I gave up chips October 1st, and some nights I just feel like I'm going to curl up in a little ball and just kind of weep my way. And I also surrendered eating after 6 o'clock so I can have a long period of time, intermittent fasting until I eat again. And those two things sometimes at night, that feeding of the desire so that you don't sit with what's emerging. And then, of course, too much TV also shifts into that. So then you feed it with something else. So some of you talked about letting go of, you know, I know lots of you let go of different things, but at this point, looking at sugar, looking at salt, and you've talked about letting go of smoking, a more obvious addiction, right, that we have. And I can even feel that as I was sharing, I'm here with my grandmother. No, I'm the grandmother. I'm here with my granddaughter. And I can feel this kind of greedy craving come up where I'm like, I want more, I want more. And it kind of reminds me that wherever we go, there we are. So we sense an object and then we put our desire, whether it's TV, food, phone, selfie, sex, sugar, salt, tobacco, any kind of more obvious addiction, a way of feeling loved and wrapped up with my granddaughter who runs to me and wraps her arms around me and I get to hold her body next to mine, then I need to step out of that as a craving and instead accept that I can feel a sense of in the moment belonging and purpose, just being present. So our brains often link up certain things like sugar or salt. Let's use those because several of you mentioned it. And then we either put on this is pleasant or this is unpleasant. So we train ourselves in some ways. So then we crave the pleasant. And you might recall that Jon Kabat-Zinn, in all his mindfulness work, talks about that this is the nature of being human. So all that we've explored today, all of us, all 7.8 or 9 billion of us on this planet struggle with this. And that's the first thing that we need to acknowledge. We're not alone in this sense of wanting a purpose and wanting to belong, and then craving, making that into a desire thing. So we crave the present and we resist or avert the unpleasant. So this craving a pleasurable experience, we want the kind of hit in the brain, we want the psychological sense of belonging. So the Buddha talked about the moderate way, right? The going down the middle. So we accept, the way that you referenced, I was belonging somewhere else and I celebrated an anniversary and I had a strong sense of belonging with this group. And I didn't hear, oh, I crave this the next night. I craved this over and over again. Because sometimes we get fed in a way that we feel satiated, we feel replete. So that would be one of the things we start to pay attention to. So if we have a craving of sugar and then we fill that craving with the sugar, mostly we don't feel satiated if we're in the act of craving. So that would be one of the things, is tune into what is it that when I crave and then I have it, that then I feel replete. And that example that you used about, I go to this grand, this thing where I celebrate with my people and I feel a sense of belonging and other people come who are guests. And how do I feel at the end of that? Does it feel in the deeper sense of a purpose? So Judson Brewer talks about, in the craving is the promise of freedom from the craving itself. So we can't change the objects externally to ourselves that trigger that craving. We can't, or our desire, let's call it desire as well. These cues will continue to be in our lives, unabated and unbidden. We might show up at a weekend and we might meet someone who triggers the craving of aversion, that sense of, oh, I can't bear this. And we might need to spend a day, a week, a year, 10 years moving through that desire to see that this person that we have projected onto, or the experience, triggered something in us, and learning how to own that. That's part of what Brewer talks about. So mindfulness is the key to cutting craving that leads to addictive behavior. So Judson Brewer says, mindfulness functions to stay aware of and become more conscious of the need to judge and identify pleasant and unpleasant experiences. He goes on to say, when we experience craving or aversion, we build our practice so we can notice them as merely pleasant or unpleasant sensations or thoughts or feelings. And as you know, when you hear that over the last time that we've practiced together, some of you have been practicing with me a year and a half. When we practice regularly, we more often are able to create that breath. As you described, going to the retreat, meeting someone old who triggers something internally, and then moving through it so you can actually see the person and the experience as they are to come through. Here's a very interesting metaphor that Judson Brewer uses called the nav system, is what he says to it. So, you're driving in your car, and whether you have a nav system, I don't have one, but most of us have looked at our phones or on the computer at some kind of system that navigates it, right? Especially when I'm here in Victoria, I'm always looking up. I just want to drive 10 minutes and I have to look up, where do I go, right? So that kind of Google mapping or navigation system that's built into them, this device is going to guide me through the unfamiliar territory of Victoria and help me anticipate what's lying ahead so I don't drive off into the ocean. I don't know how many of you have heard the story about the young Japanese students who so believed in their navigation system that they actually drove off a cliff and their car went into the water because the navigation system said, keep going off this road. And they didn't look up. What they did was they just were talking and the navigation system said, keep going. And they went right over into the ocean in their car. They had to get out and they lost their car. It was a big kerfuffle. So sometimes we get confused and we think the navigation system is actually real life, as in this case with these Japanese students. So we need to keep staying attention to what's real. Well, reality. Okay, so what's happening in this present moment is real. Let's say that, because we know in Buddhism, reality and illusions are more complex than just that. But let's pay attention to what we know to be the reality and the truth right now. And that reality might be that I'm craving sugar. When I'm here with my family in the West, I don't have those cravings. Big surprise. I'm all wrapped up in belonging and love and snuggles and all that kind of stuff. And I don't have the same kind of cravings as when I'm sitting home alone in my home. So I'm like, oh yeah, just kind of looking at that. So we often have our craving minds. And then we have this thing that I need to have the chips at night, or then I have the craving. So there's some way we confuse the chips, in my case, the saltiness of the chips, as a solution, as though then once I have the chips, then I'm going to feel connected, belonging, a sense of purpose in the world. I loved those two kind of focus, but instead it creates more craving. So can we begin to discern when I am drawn to something as a desire, is that something going to fill me and I'm going to feel satiated? Or is that something going to continue my desire? And as you described about meeting that person after 35 years and moving through your own internal emotional compass till you could recognize that I can just see this person and let go and walk away. Emotional maturity begins to show up. Sometimes not so much. But these navigation systems that are meant to guide us. So I say October 1st, no more eating after 6 at night, no more chips at night. So as soon as I have my big meal at night, I put down, close the kitchen up. I spent quite a bit of time researching it, brush my teeth right after dinner, so that there's some specific things that we talked about. Each of you shared a little bit about What are the specific things that help me to notice? And then the thing we're going to talk about is how we can create increased mindfulness in the moment. And most of you, I'm sure, have heard of Eckhart Tolle, who supports using one breath when I have the desire. And that certainly has helped me during the chip withdrawal, the salt withdrawal. And when I take one breath, sometimes I can pass through just the intensity of the moment and then make it to the next breath. I've been able to do that since October 1st, just through grace. But while I'm here, my family eats more sugar than I do. And so I've had more sugar than I'm used to. And I don't have the capacity because my sense of belonging draws me so deeply that I don't yet have the capacity to hold to not having sugar when sugar is shared amongst us. And so I've accepted that the week that I'm here, I'm, having a little bit of sugar. Then will I need to reset that? Maybe I'll need to reset it when I fly home on Thursday to say, okay, back to no more sugar, which doesn't feel like an issue in my day-to-day life. But when I'm here, it stirs up something in me. I want to belong. And when they're having a muffin with a little chocolate icing on it, I have a muffin too. Is that life? Is that, I'm not sure. So we're going to explore all that together. The next subject before we do our practice is called resilience in the face of cravings. Resilience in the face of cravings. So when we're faced with our days or activities and situations that have what we call cravings or temptations, cake, drink, phone, being too busy, we might have a torrent of thoughts. Here we go again. I can't believe I'm about to. I really caught myself around having the chocolate muffin yesterday. And then I started to do that. So I stopped the mind from the judgment and I pulled back and was able to make a choice. So while I'm here, I'm going to have this chocolate muffin and let it go. So it's part of it is stopping the thinking and making a decision. And the pull of craving and the disruption of this intense desire, how it relates to us emotionally, physically, whether it's salt, sugar. So how do we use our practice to help us? So let's get behind the impulse and watch our own thinking, feelings, and sensations.
Excuse me, Susan, what was the first thing before making a decision? What is the first point before making a decision? You stop thinking?
Oh, you pay attention to the torrent of thoughts that are going through.
Attention.
Yeah, so paying attention, becoming aware of. So that's what I noticed yesterday. We drove up to the ocean and we're walking through the woods and had such a beautiful time. Had a fire on the beach and the ocean. And then we stopped off at this gorgeous restaurant on the ocean that's child friendly, and we're just all kind of connecting and having a meal. And they bought chocolate muffins and here's yours, right? And I'm just like, thanks. But I noticed as soon as I picked up that I started to have a torrent of thoughts and judgments. So what I chose in the moment was to let go of the thoughts and judgments and to join in and have a chocolate muffin. There was no serious consequences. And then I reset my intention just for today to not have sugar, to take a break again, just for today. So how do we follow the moderate path that the Buddhists suggest as the core route? So in our practice that we're about to do, I'm going to invite you to choose something that you have craving about right now. Doesn't matter what it is. Choosing something that you might notice emerges for you. And this practice is about shifting to foster a more flexible relationship with your desires. Was I successful yesterday? I don't know. Success, not success. I don't think there's anything like success or not success from what I understand in my studies and my research with Judson Brewer and with many others. So as we build our practice more consistently, whether you do 5 minutes a day, a breath a day, 20 minutes twice a day, whatever you do, it begins to build your capacity to stay conscious in the moment. So was I more flexible yesterday in accepting the muffin? Would I sit there? I didn't have the capacity to sit there and still feel belonging while everyone else was having the chocolate muffin and I wasn't. I don't have that capacity yet. Instead, I joined in. There was no serious consequences. There was me making a flexible decision in the moment, and then to recommit today for this day, to just this 24 hours to not have sugar. And I don't know, we'll just kind of see. So fostering a flexible relationship with your desires. And this requires a lot of practice to be of real benefit. This practice helps the most if it becomes a habit. And it will give you a measure of psychological and emotional freedom, whether it's chocolate or an intense and self-destructive urge, which we might all have from time to time. So any questions or comments before we shift into the practice itself?
How do you spell his last name?
Oh, I'll send you the link. It's Brewer,
Right.
Brewer, Judson
Just-
Brewer. But I'm happy to send you the link.
Okay, sure.
Article that he's written that's really explains his work at a high level that you might find interesting. So I'll send
Exactly.
it to the group. Okay. Thank you for the question, Pam. So come into a comfortable seated position that allows you to settle. Well,